So my name is Andy Hurren. I'm a security and compliance technical specialist with Microsoft, really focusing on the modern workplace. So it is a great opportunity, I feel, to work with partners like Fast Track, and I'm very, very happy to be here today to participate. What I'll be talking about today is really around how, with the Microsoft solution stack, really building on what everyone has spoken about today, and particularly Brody in the last session, how the approach that Microsoft is taking to drive more effective, more efficient security outcomes. First and foremost, you've probably heard a theme today around the challenges around security. Security is it's not easy to achieve, particularly in the context of expanding digital estates, with the heterogeneous nature of the assets that we need to protect. Everything is connected. Everything has different ways of being attacked as well. So as a security operations function, it is very, very challenging to deliver a cost-effective, efficient, and sustainable defense because of just the sheer number of ways in which attackers can target our environments. So when we think about security operations, there's a significant number of areas that we hear from our customers, and personally from my own experience, I've lived and breathed, and it's this idea that if you think about all of the great solutions that we've spoke about today, they all provide additional visibility and additional control, but it can also introduce additional signals that you need to analyze as from a security operations perspective, and prioritize from an investigation perspective. So with great visibility, you may have introduce this challenge of more noise that you need to mine through to identify signal. So we need to think about how we can make that a far more simple process. Going through that process of bringing on more signals and more events and information can also be very, very costly. So, and if you think about the way in which you would historically have approached that log consumption, log aggregation challenge, you would typically put a piece of hardware in place. You'd have to try and size it accordingly, and then plan for peak loads, and maybe never even get to that peak load. And then when you did get to the peak load, you might have to, because you bring in more signals, you'd have to think about additional hardware and additional costs associated with that. So from an operations perspective, upkeep perspective, very, very challenging. And when you did find a signal, being able to take action, understanding what that signal is, and then being able to carry out an effective incident response in a timely fashion is always a challenge, again, because of the complexity of the environments that we work in. And then the final piece I wanted to call out was really this idea of security skills. I mean, it's very very frequently cited over the last few years, and if anything, it's very, or more acutely felt in regions such as Australia. Finding people to man the tools, to be able to go deep into analysing the signals that these solutions are producing is very challenging, because there's just not enough people. So we need to think about how we can drive efficiencies so that the resources that we do have can be more effective, can be more efficient, provide more proactive security, but also when compromises do occur, so not if, but rather when compromises do occur, that we can reduce the dwell time, the impact of those breaches as well. So from a Microsoft perspective, really what we're guiding towards is this idea of leveraging the cloud as a significant enabler of security capability. The cloud allows us to bring in intelligence from a myriad of points. If you think about what Microsoft as an organization, we're privy to a huge amount of signal from the services that we provide, the operating systems, and we're able to use that to help empower the solutions that we provide from a security perspective. From a Microsoft as a company, as an organization perspective, of a global organization, some 140, 150,000 people, we've had to use all these techniques that we've talked about today and Fast Track have talked about today ourselves, because we couldn't possibly scale to deliver the services that we do with the people that we have effectively if we don't essentially use these capabilities ourselves. So using the cloud is a huge enabler, and then taking that information and data and applying machine learning, applying artificial intelligence, so that we can drive more effective security outcomes for our operations team. Now, what I wanted to touch on here was a reference architecture that we're really using to guide how you position the various capabilities within Microsoft in the context of security operations. So if we think about a security analyst, you have to have some level of, you want to have some level of ability to measure how you're continuously improving. Where are you at today, and how can your organization be better? Incidentally, we do have a number of articles that we've produced over the last probably 6 to 9 months that talk about Microsoft's own experience of continuous improvement in our CDOC, our Cyber Defense Operations Center. So I'd highly recommend reviewing those. But if we start with the analyst, what has the analyst and the approach historically been? It's really the silver bullet, as it were, in a lot of ways, was promoted in the industry, was to invest in a SIEM technology, security information event management tool set, and then from the various tool sets that you have, whether it's networking or endpoint or identity controls, take the events that are produced by those services and throw them, throw the fire hose, point the fire hose at the SIEM. And then the promise of the SIEM was that it would amazingly do all these things and provide you those signals. But the reality is there's a huge amount of challenges around doing that. As mentioned before, that fire hose approach just means increasing cost from a service provision perspective, and using just the classic approach of just correlation of events, we tend to miss things. So our view is really how can we improve this? And a lot of the approaches from a basic or classic perspective was to augment the SOC. So and this is a very, very powerful way to provide improvements in that classic model, and that's bring in partners, bring in third parties to augment with those skill sets to help augment and empower the analyst. Now, what is the Microsoft approach to really optimizing this scenario? So, a huge number of different devices across the digital estate, a whole lot of different events and APIs and what have you, and all that complexity of integration and analysis. So one of the first things that we've brought to bear is this concept of the Graph Security API. So our intention is to essentially bring a common API or a common communication method for events across the Microsoft 365 estate. Also, with some of our partner vendors, allow them to send their signals using that API. So what that immediately provides is a significant simplification for integration into your classic SIEM, classic SOC workflows. No longer do you have to have API connections into all of these different tool sets. Rather, you could just be ingesting off of one API. That's only one part of the process. That's allowing for an easier way of connecting that information into the SIEM. The next piece is what we call Microsoft Threat Protection, and a lot of the tools that the Fast Track team have talked about today essentially fall within what we see as our construct of Microsoft Threat Protection. You can think of, well, Brody just spoke about Defender ATP. You can think about Defender ATP as an expert tool built by essentially subject matter experts to help around endpoint detection response, endpoint protection. Who better to provide that subject matter expertise than the vendor, that Microsoft, essentially. So what we're doing with MTP is we're providing essentially processing and automation at each of these points, whether it's identity, whether it's email services, whether it's cloud access security brokering. We're providing that expertise in that environment so that we then process that information, we process those raw logs, apply our analytics, and rather than sending all that raw information to the SIEM to handle, we can instead send very specific, very strong, high-fidelity signals to the SIEM to help make the SIEM approach far more effective. We also provide augmentation outside of just the purely the technical capabilities as well. So if you're not aware, Microsoft does provide a number of capabilities through our support organization, through our cybersecurity group, and embedded within some of our products, such as Defender ATP, where we have the ability to provide human beings to help you with your security challenges. So in the event of an incident, we can essentially bring in Microsoft people to assist. But what I would say is we're not in the marketplace to by any stretch of the imagination to replace partners. Rather, we need our partners like Fast Track to provide those configuration capabilities, those response capabilities as well, because we're not going to market to provide our own managed security service. You know, we believe partners are the best method to provide that augmentation. Security automation and incident and response. So Brodie spoke a lot about the benefits of automation. And from a tooling perspective, you may well have heard of the security orchestration, automation, and response capability. So we've essentially designed that capability or built that capability into our overarching fabric. So Microsoft Threat Protection is not just about bringing in signals or being a Microsoft SIEM, as it were, for only Microsoft solutions, but it's about building playbooks and automation into that process, into each of these expert tools, but also across the whole platform. And I'll show you an example of that very, very shortly when we come to the demonstration. The final piece in our reference architecture is Azure Sentinel. So, and I'm going to go into more depth around what Azure Sentinel is, but really it's Microsoft's SIEM, and it allows us to extend beyond the Microsoft world. So it allows us to bring in feeds from any kind of essentially system that is producing security events, and then provide the ability for us to then do analysis as well. So Microsoft Threat Protection very much focused on optimizing the Microsoft 365 estate and the export tools that you might have within that platform. But then Azure Sentinel becomes your overarching lens across everything across the digital estate, every type of device or security tool that you might have. So why is Sentinel different from a SIEM, a classic SIEM perspective? We've built Sentinel to be what we call a cloud native SIEM. So it is essentially a PaaS or SaaS service. There is no infrastructure for you to think about deploying. It is built upon Azure, and it's designed to give you that ability to really provide you accessibility to a SIEM. What I mean by that is you can very simply stand up Sentinel, start monitoring, without having to think about the scaling of the service, standing up infrastructure, maintaining databases, re-indexing databases, all of those kinds of things that you would have to do in the classic on-premise world with SIEM. We want to get away from that because again, using the cloud, we can drive that efficacy. So no infrastructure costs. You essentially are just paying for what you use in the service. It's all deliverable through the Azure portal, which I'm going to show you a demonstration of. One of the key, I guess, approaches for us in terms of bringing the solution to market has been that we want to make this cost effective and accessible. So we've made Office 365 data and some other sources across Microsoft, the Microsoft platform, free for ingestion and analysis. So that can represent a significant cost saving. So for example, events coming from Office 365 Activity Management API, you could be sending those, and that doesn't represent a cost. Whereas with other solutions, that can be a lot of data that you need to think about in terms of the pricing models. Now, from a simplicity perspective, with Sentinel, we've provided out-of-the-box integrations with Microsoft solutions. That should be absolutely an expectation of the service that we provide. But we also provide connectors and work with partners to provide additional connectors to different data sources. And the platform, because it's been built upon mature capabilities on Azure Log Analytics, Azure Monitor, Azure Logic Apps, so solutions that have been around for a significant period of time, they've been designed for scale so that they can really deal with a low amount of events or bursting of events to significant volumes. So we've been able to engineer something that has been been able to be brought to market very rapidly with a very high level of maturity. Now, I will look at this a bit more in the demonstration, but you can benefit from the Microsoft intelligence capabilities that we provide. So we are continuously adding in new machine learning models, as well as rules to provide, I guess, your classic correlation approaches. But as an analyst, you can build your own. And we've fostered a security community. So similar to Defender ATP and other products, we have GitHub communities that we are curating through our security team, as well as building out rewards programs as well for customers to also submit essentially rules that they see as being useful for the broader community. I mentioned before machine learning, so we're not just relying on the classic correlation approach, but rather using machine learning allows us to do or provide a significant uplift in terms of detection capabilities, particularly for unknown threats or previously unknown threats, as well as long tail type attacks. So attacks that might be occurring over a substantial period of time that classic correlation approaches may not detect as well. You can also bring your own intelligence through, by Microsoft's nature, we are very, very focused on AI and ML. So we've built out that capability to bring your own ML models, not just Microsoft models, into consideration within the scene. The net goal is to reduce the alert fatigue, reduce the amount of signals that we're typically having to go through. Now, investigations, we'll look at that from a deeper perspective. From a response perspective, we'll look at that as well, this idea of security orchestration and automation. So, into a very quick demo of Microsoft Threat Protection just to start with. So this should look very similar to what Brodie has presented, but essentially security.microsoft.com, if you're not aware, is essentially becoming one of our key portals for threat information. And what you can see here is that we're sourcing signals from a variety of different tools, not just Defender ATP. So we can see Office ATP, Cloud App Security, endpoint detection and response. And rather than presenting to the analyst, in this case, this incident here, presenting 50-odd alerts, we're presenting one incident and bundling all of those alerts together. We're also painting a picture of what the attack chain essentially looked like for that incident across those different points, across CASB, across Defender ATP. We're also able to have visibility into the devices that were potentially affected, the users, visibility of the mailbox as well. So in Exchange Online, are there artifacts that might be residing in mailboxes that we should be investigating? And similar to Defender ATP, or you can see in this example that we can see a number of investigations were kicked off on different devices. We've also kicked off an investigation in Office 365 ATP. So we're investigating a particular mail flow or mail-related incident. And this should look very similar to what Brodie has presented as well, because we are driving towards this consistency across the Microsoft tooling. So in this case, a user reported a message alert. So as a user reported a piece of fish. we ran through a playbook process, and out of 90, we actually found 93 emails that were related to that one email that was reported, and 34 of those were malicious, 63 were phish, and all of them had malicious URLs embedded. So this is a whole automated process across the environment. Whoops, there we go. Now, just moving into Sentinel. So from a Sentinel perspective, what I wanted to show here was really the simplicity of being able to really get started with using Sentinel. So it starts within the Microsoft Azure portal. And I think of it like going to a restaurant. You know, we want to get ourselves a seam off of the menu, and I've done a search for Azure Sentinel. Now, if you're doing this the first time, you'll be presented with a wizard to configure an Azure workspace. So essentially, somewhere to store the events that you're going to ingest. I've got a cybersecurity demonstration ready to go. We're going to log in, and like every security tool, you've got to be presented with a dashboard. But what I want to show in this dashboard, which is customizable, is really the significant amount of data that we can bring in. So back to alert fatigue, we've got a huge number of events coming into the system. We need to find the signal in essentially that noise. And if we pivot over to the side here, you can see 1.9 million events, but we found 2 alerts. We found 2 signals within 1.9 million events. We found 1 alert within 2 million events. So we can very quickly use the tooling to hone in on where there may be a potential threat. And we also have visibility at a top level to see if the incidents are increasing, or the alerts are increasing, or the events are going up or down. So we can understand if we might be under attack, or whether there might be an issue with the monitoring process. Now, your SIEM is only as good as the sources that you can, essentially the events you can feed into it. So very simple to add data connectors or connect to services. So I mentioned before, we've got essentially a menu of the Microsoft tooling services. So we can very quickly add in Azure AD logs, or Cloud App Security logs, Defender ATP logs. But we also have a very rich community of data sources as well. So here we're just looking at Palo Alto. We've got some dashboards and queries available, as well as predefined analytic rules that can be applied to those types of events. You can also bring in your own syslog events or Ceph formatted events as well. So there is definitely a level of flexibility in terms of what we can ingest into Sentinel. So once we've got data coming in, then it's about throwing analytics at that data. And what I wanted to show you here was just the number of
Sorry, Andy,
alerts.
can I just jump in? I wanted to take this chance to pass on a question that's come through, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure, please.
So Asaf asks, when adding logs, are these from in-premise systems?
They can be both. So what we provide is the ability for, we've got a collection agent, which we can essentially deploy on premise, and then have that essentially act as the bridge to pass those logs up to the cloud service.
Thanks, Andy.
So great question. So just really cool. I'm not going to go into the depths of specific rules, but I just wanted to call out that here we have a variety of different machine learning models, as well as fusion rules, AI rules that we're applying to analytics. But the item called scheduled. So scheduled essentially represents a rule that either Microsoft has provided, or it's a rule that you can customize and create yourself based on the Kusto query language. As you might be doing investigation and analysis, you can start to turn those queries into alerts. Once we have our rules configured, then we can look at incidents. And again, similar to Defender ATP and MTP, where we're combining alerts into incidents. And I'm going to pivot into this one of these particular alerts. So the network request Tor anonymization service. So you can see there's 2 alerts associated with that particular incident. And, oh, sorry, I'm highlighting on the wrong one there. What we're able to do, if we go to the right alert, fantastic. Cool. So what we're able to see is a description of the incident itself, and then we can pivot in to find out more information. So I've clicked on the view full details, and what that's going to show me is more information about the specific alerts, and I can pivot into more information therein, the number of entities that are involved, where did it come from. In this case, we've got an example of Palo Alto, so those rules coming from Palo, and by combining them with Microsoft alerts, we're potentially surfacing something that we may not have seen just in isolation. Clicking on the investigation button, I'm presented with a visualization to really help aid the investigation process. So I can start to hone in on a particular alert. So the alerts there are represented with the shields, and then the assets as well. So just hovering over Megan, the user account, I can see that there's actually 64 related alerts. And if I click on that, it's going to pivot out and provide me with a linkage, a visualized linkage over to those specific alerts. So I can start to build out a map of how various alerts and entities are related in the context of an incident. Here we can see some 272 alerts. I'm not going to build that one out because it will, from a visual perspective, it may not be the most effective thing to do. But if I take one of these alerts, I can also very quickly find out more information about the alert, but then pivot from that alert into the playbooks. So I've mentioned very quickly the playbook concept. With playbooks, what we're essentially doing is leveraging logic apps to allow you to define your own workflows. So in response to an activity, you could be to a particular incident or an alert. You could be deleting a message from a mailbox. You could be opening a Jira ticket, opening a ServiceNow ticket. You could be essentially whatever it is process that you want to automate. You could be defining that to really accelerate the security operations of efficacy. We've got over 200 connectors in logic apps and 200 and growing. So it's a visual process as opposed to having to code code these outcomes. And final piece we want to show you here is just that you can pivot into you can pivot into the event view for the alerts. And what this is taking us into is a query language called Kusto, which we use across Defender ATP. We use across Azure Log Analytics as well. So you can build out your own customized queries to help with your hunting, as well as defining your own rule sets as well. Importantly, again, it is consistent across the Microsoft platform. So it means that if you're hunting in any of these solutions, it's going to be a consistent experience.